Women compelled to bear consanguineous children within an Appalachian sect, the darkest cult in America. This is the account of one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent American history. A case concealed for nearly 4 decades within the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains until its exposure in 1975. During the autumn of 1975, police officer Raymond Holcomb tracked a trail through Virginia's western Appalachian forests, investigating reports of missing young women from the area. The season was turning. Golden red leaves fell upon the damp earth as grey clouds veiled the sun. The only sounds beyond the sharp wind through the trees were the crunches of Holcomb's boots on dried branches. After 3 days of searching, Holcomb discovered a clearing hidden from main paths. There, concealed by dense vegetation and natural rock formations, stood a complex of rustic cabins, an isolated settlement, utterly disconnected from the outside world. Approaching with caution, the officer noted something unsettling. Children displaying clear physical signs of genetic issues played on muddy ground. What most captured his attention was the silence. These children did not speak. They merely exchanged incomprehensible sounds. Their faces bore similar features, as if all were siblings. Yet something was profoundly amiss there, Holcomb noted in his official report. This marked the outside world's first contact with the Sheffford community, a secluded sect founded in 1932 by Isaiah Sheffford, a former miner who, after the Great Depression, led 12 families into the mountains with promises of a new life, free from the poverty and economic strife plaguing the nation. What originated as a refuge for desperate families transformed over for decades into one of the most disturbing cases of isolation and systematic consanguinity ever documented in the United States. In the weeks following the discovery, an investigation by the Department of Social Services revealed 87 individuals living within the Sheffford community. Among them, 32 were children and adolescents with varying degrees of cognitive and physical impairment. Many exhibited congenital malformations such as cleft palates, deformed jaws, and severe vision issues. Documentation uncovered on-site, including a detailed diary maintained by leader Isaiah Sheffford, disclosed something even more alarming. The community had devised an elaborate system of arranged marriages among close relatives, explicitly intended to purify the Sheffford bloodline. We now understand that the Sheffford blood must remain pure, uncontaminated by the impurities of the outside world. Each new generation forged within our own lineage brings us nearer to the promised perfection, Isaiah wrote in a 1956 entry, by which time the community was already into its second generation of consanguineous unions. Subsequent studies indicated that children born in the Sheffford community shared, on average, more genetic material with one another than regular siblings would in conventional families. Geographic and social isolation, coupled with religious indoctrination, had produced a closed system where consanguinity was not only accepted but actively promoted. Dr. Elizabeth Marvers, a University of Virginia geneticist who studied the case, explained, "What we encountered in the Sheffford community was a perfect storm of geographical isolation, extreme poverty, and religious indoctrination, leading to a dramatic increase in problematic recessive genes within the population." The physical and cognitive consequences for children born in that environment were devastating. Among the most shocking revelations was the House of Mothers, a separate cabin where women of reproductive age were kept under strict watch. According to gathered testimonies, women were categorized by lineage and assigned specific partners by Isaiah Sheffford and later by his eldest son, Ezekiel. Rebecca Sheffford, a rescued 24-year-old woman, reported, "From childhood, we were taught our sacred purpose was to bear children for the glory of the family. We genuinely believed the outside world was condemned and only pure blood would survive the coming time." Check if you're already subscribed to this channel. The truth about these secret communities must be exposed, and only we possess the courage to reveal what society tries to hide. Subscribe now so you don't miss any of these stories that mainstream outlets attempt to silence. The year was 1932, and the United States faced the darkest hour of the Great Depression. In a small mining village in Western Virginia, Isaiah Sheffford, then 41, was known for his apocalyptic sermons at community gatherings. A former miner and World War I veteran, Isaiah had become a charismatic figure, blending biblical passages with conspiracy theories about civilization's imminent collapse. "The world as we know it is dying," he preached. "Bankers and politicians have corrupted everything. Only blood of our blood will survive what is to come. The era's devastating economic conditions created the perfect environment for his ideas to gain traction. Entire families had lost everything: the jobs, homes, life savings. Despair was palpable, and Isaiah offered something precious: hope and a concrete plan. In March of that year, Isaiah assembled 12 families of approximately 67 people and led them to a remote region in the Appalachian Mountains, about 40 kilometers from the nearest town. The area, which he claimed to have received in a divine vision, was an abandoned property spanning over 200 acres, with a natural water source and cultivable land. Martha Jenkins, one of the few survivors of the original community who later left, described the early years. At first, it was about survival and independence. We built cabins, planted gardens, raised animals. We worked from dawn till dusk. But there was a genuine sense of community and purpose. Historical records confirm that initially, the Sheffford community functioned much like other groups seeking self-sufficiency during the Great Depression. They made semi-annual trips to the nearest town to trade animal skins and handicrafts for supplies they couldn't produce. The community's transformation into an isolationist sect occurred gradually. Isaiah's diaries, recovered during the investigation, show a dramatic shift in his thinking around 1938, when he began developing what he termed the doctrine of blood purity. "I received a revelation last night," he wrote in September 1938. "Our community was chosen to preserve the true human lineage. The outside world is contaminated, its genes corrupted by generations of impure mixing. We must look inward, not outward, to find our partners." This shift coincided with two significant events: the death of Isaiah's wife, Sarah, during childbirth, and the outbreak of World War II in Europe, which he interpreted as the beginning of the apocalypse he had foretold. From 1940 onward, trips to town grew less frequent, ceasing entirely by 1945. Isaiah instituted what he called the Lineage Council, a system where he, as patriarch, determined who could marry within the community. The first arranged marriages involved second cousins, a practice that, while increasing genetic risks, still maintained enough diversity to avoid immediate severe problems. However, over generations of continuous isolation, options became increasingly limited. The marriage system was based on what Isaiah termed a spiritual compatibility, but in practice meant he controlled reproduction within the community completely, explained Dr. James Thornton, an anthropologist who studied the case. Over time, virtually everyone in the community became related on multiple kinship levels. In 1952, Isaiah formalized what would become the sect's most disturbing aspect, the House of Mothers. All women of reproductive age were moved to a central cabin, where they lived under the direct supervision of Martha Sheff, Isaiah's second wife. A recovered document titled Laws of Purification explicitly outlined the treatment of women. Woman is the sacred vessel through which our lineage purifies itself. She does not belong to herself but to the continuity of Sheffford blood. Women underwent regular examinations to determine their fertile cycles and were assigned to specific partners during these periods. Those who failed to conceive after 3 years were relegated to service roles like food preparation and caring for younger children. Sarah Miller, a historian specializing in isolated Appalachian communities, notes, "What makes the Sheffford case particularly disturbing is how it transformed regional cultural practices, self-sufficiency, distrust of government, strong family identity, into an oppressive system justified by a twisted ideology." Upon Isaiah's death in 1963 at age 72, leadership passed to his eldest son, Ezekiel, then 38. Under his rule, consanguineous practices grew even more extreme, encompassing unions between uncles and nieces, and even between siblings. A 1968 entry from Ezekiel's diary reveals the ideology's intensification. "My father began our purification, but I must complete it. Each generation must draw closer to perfection until our blood becomes one and indivisible." The community's isolation was reinforced by severe punishments for any member expressing desire for outside contact. Survivor testimonies describe purification rituals involving solitary confinement and food deprivation. When the community was finally discovered in 1975, it was in its third generation of systematic consanguineous marriage, with devastating genetic consequences increasingly evident. Hannah Sheffford was only 18 when police and social services arrived. Unlike many children born there, Hannah had no visible physical deformities. However, later psychological evaluations revealed the profound impact of isolation and indoctrination. "I was considered special because I was born unmarked," Hannah explained in a 1982 statement. Ezekiel said, "I was proof we were on the right path, that purification was working. I believed him completely." Hannah had been designated as the future wife of Jacob, her father's half-brother and her first cousin on her mother's side. The marriage was scheduled for her 19th birthday, just 3 months after the authorities' intervention. Medical evaluations of the 32 children and adolescents revealed a disturbing pattern of conditions associated with consanguinity. Among the most common were cognitive deficits in 27 of 32 children, facial malformations including underdeveloped jaws and asymmetry in 19 children, fused fingers, syndactyly, in 8 children, congenital heart defects in 11 children, and severe vision issues including partial blindness in 14 children. Dr. Catherine Reynolds, the pediatrician who coordinated initial evaluations, described, "What we witnessed was an abnormal concentration of rare genetic conditions. In such a small population, the likelihood of observing so many manifestations of problematic recessive genes would be nearly zero without systematic consanguinity." One of the most alarming findings was the prevalence of Tay-Sachs disease among younger children, a condition typically associated with Ashkenazi Jewish populations and rarely seen in rural American communities. 5 children under 3 showed signs of the disease, which is invariably fatal and results from both parents carrying the recessive gene. The presence of Tay-Sachs in this population indicates a carrier was likely among the community's original founders, explained Dr. Reynolds. In a normal population, the chance of 2 carriers meeting and having children is extremely low. But with repeated consanguineous marriage, the gene concentrated within the population until it emerged with devastating force. The psychological impact on the community's women was equally profound. Of the 23 rescued women of reproductive age, 18 had given birth at least once. Interviews conducted by psychologists revealed patterns of complex trauma, including severe dissociation during traumatic events, fragmented identity, difficulty making autonomous decisions, deeply ingrained beliefs about purity and contamination, paralyzing fear of the outside world, and devastating guilt for participating in the system even as victims. Rebecca, one of the rescued women, shared, "The hardest part was realizing we loved our children desperately, yet brought them into a world that condemned them to suffering." How does a mother overcome that? If you're feeling both revulsion and compassion, leave a phrase in the comments. No child deserves to be born condemned. Your voice matters in ensuring such stories are known and situations like these never occur. For children born in the community, transitioning to the outside world was especially traumatic. Beyond medical challenges, they had to adapt to a world completely foreign to them. Dr. Michael Landry, a child psychologist who worked with Sheffield children for over a decade, explained, "These children face not only physical and cognitive disabilities but also profound cultural dislocation. They grew up believing the outside world was evil and their community the only safe place. The intervention, while necessary to save them, was experienced as additional trauma." Recordings from early therapy sessions with older children reveal the depth of their indoctrination. Many expressed fear of contamination from strangers and demonstrated ritualized purification behaviors. Samuel, a rescued 16-year-old, described in a recorded session, "We must perform purification rituals each morning, or bad blood will take hold. If we don't, marks will appear on our faces and everyone will know we're contaminated." In 1977, 2 years after the Sheffield community's discovery, the University of Virginia established the Lineage Project, a multidisciplinary study analyzing the genetic, psychological, and sociological effects of 4 decades of isolation and systematic consanguinity. Dr. Robert Harrington, the geneticist leading the project's scientific component, explained, "The Sheffield case offered a uniquely tragic opportunity to study consanguinity's effects in an isolated human population over multiple generations. The collected data have been invaluable for understanding how deleterious recessive genes manifest in closed populations." Analysis of genetic and genealogical records revealed an average inbreeding coefficient of 0.16 in the latest generation, an extremely high value comparable only to some historically isolated communities worldwide. For context, the coefficient for first cousins is approximately 0.0625. What we observed was a progressive, deliberate accumulation of inbreeding, explained Dr. Harrington. Starting with second cousin marriages in the first generation, progressing to first cousin marriages in the second, and finally including sibling and uncle-niece unions in the third. This deliberate escalation in genetic proximity caused a dramatic reduction in population genetic diversity and a corresponding rise in rare recessive disease manifestation. One of the study's most revealing aspects was the analysis of specific genetic markers in the community's children. Researchers identified an abnormally high prevalence of homozygosity, the presence of two identical alleles at a specific genetic locus, indicating many children had inherited identical gene copies from common ancestors. Dr. Margaret Wilson, a medical genetics expert involved in the study, noted, in a normal population, an individual's chance of inheriting two identical alleles of a rare recessive gene is extremely low. But in the Sheffford community, we observed multiple such cases, resulting in conditions normally having odds of 1 in tens of thousands. A significant finding was identifying a specific genetic mutation originating with one of the community's founders, a defect on chromosome 11 linked to a rare congenital heart disease. This mutation, rarely seen in the general population, was present in 37% of tested children. We're observing the founder effect combined with a population bottleneck, explained Dr. Wilson. A rare mutation present in one founder became common due to reproductive isolation and repeated consanguineous marriage. Beyond physical manifestations, the study extensively documented cognitive and neurological effects of prolonged inbreeding. IQ testing revealed a distribution significantly below the population average, with scores averaging 23 points lower than expected for children of the same age. The observed cognitive impact cannot be attributed solely to social isolation or lack of educational stimulation, concluded Dr. Harrington. The patterns align with known effects of inbreeding depression, the reduction in biological fitness from reproduction between genetically related individuals. A particularly disturbing aspect was documentation of how the Sheffford community developed an elaborate belief system rationalizing, even celebrating, physical manifestations of consanguinity. Recovered documents revealed children born with obvious malformations were often described as having sacred marks, visible signs of their lineage. Those with severe cognitive issues were seen as blessed with eternal innocence. Dr. Susan Reynolds, a cultural anthropologist who analyzed the belief system, noted, "This is a classic example of how ideologies evolve to justify harmful practices." The community developed a complex mythology transforming evidence of genetic damage into signs of elevated spiritual status. The Sheffford case's ethical and legal implications posed difficult questions for authorities and professionals involved. While practices clearly harmed children, many adults argued they were sincerely following religious beliefs without intent to harm. The Lineage project also documented rescued children and women's adaptation to the outside world, revealing complex patterns of trauma, resilience, and recovery that informed future protocols for intervening in isolated communities. 50 years after the Sheffford community's discovery, its legacy continues to reverberate in genetics, psychology, law, and ethics. The case, among the most extensively documented examples of systematic consanguinity in modern history, has become an essential case study across multiple disciplines. For survivors, the path to recovery has been long and complex. Of the 87 people rescued in 1975, 23 have since died, many from health complications related to genetic conditions. The younger children, now adults in their 50s, continue to face significant challenges. Emily Sheffford, who was 3 when the community was discovered, shared her journey in a 2015 documentary, "I Grew Up Between Two Worlds, the one we left behind in the mountains and an outside world that never fully understood us. Most see me merely as a victim, but our story is more complex than that." Despite severe physical deformities at birth, including a rare condition fusing her fingers and limiting mobility, Emily earned a university degree and became an advocate for people with genetically linked disabilities. "What happened in the Sheffford community was tragically wrong," she said. But reducing those born there to mere victims or medical curiosities is another form of dehumanization. We are whole individuals, not just manifestations of troubled genes. The Sheffford case also prompted significant changes in public policy regarding isolated communities and religious group interventions. The Sheffford Protocol, developed in 1982 directly resulting from the case, established guidelines for authorities addressing similar situations, emphasizing the need to balance respect for religious autonomy with protecting children's fundamental rights. Helen Roberts, a child protection policy expert who helped develop the protocol, explained, before the Sheffford case, authorities were significantly reluctant to intervene in isolated religious communities. The case set an important precedent, reaffirming that practices causing objective harm to children cannot be shielded under religious freedom. In medical genetics, samples and data from the Sheffford community continue providing valuable insights. The Sheffford Genetic Bank, maintained by the University of Virginia under strict ethical protocols, contains anonymized genetic information helping researchers identify genes associated with rare conditions and develop tests for detecting potentially problematic mutations. Dr. Jonathan Chun, a geneticist at Johns Hopkins University who used bank data for recessive disease research, noted, the Sheffford community's tragedy continues contributing to advances potentially preventing similar future suffering. It's a powerful example of learning from past errors. For local Appalachian communities, the Sheffford case remains sensitive. Many descendants of original community members who didn't follow Isaiah into the mountains still live in the region and face stigmatization due to the Sheffford name association. John Matthews, a local historian and author of Shadows in Appalachia, The True History of the Sheffford Community, said, there's a tendency to treat the case as a freak occurrence, entirely disconnected from regional culture and history. But the Sheffford community emerged from real conditions, Great Depression-era poverty, Appalachian geographical isolation, traditions of self-reliance and distrust of outsiders. Ignoring this context prevents us from recognizing how similar communities could form again. In 2005, a small memorial was placed on the land where the community once existed, now part of a nature reserve. A simple bronze plaque lists the names of the 23 children and adults who died from complications linked to consanguinity, inscribed with "in memory of those whose lives were shortened by false beliefs. May their story teach us the value of diversity and human connection." The case continues informing contemporary debates on religious freedom limits, children's rights, and state responsibilities. Jurists and ethicists frequently cite the Sheffford case in discussions about when and how authorities should intervene in cultural or religious practices causing harm. Richard Dawson, a Georgetown University medical ethics professor, noted, the Sheffford case forces us to confront deeply uncomfortable questions about autonomy, consent, and protection in a society valuing religious freedom and communities' rights to live by their beliefs. Where do we draw the line when such practices cause demonstrable harm? For medical professionals, the case underscores the importance of genetic counseling and education about consanguinity risks. Dr. Emily Carter, a Mayo Clinic genetic counseling expert, explained, we use the Sheffford case as a training case study, not only illustrating biological risks of prolonged consanguinity but also raising awareness of approaching this topic in culturally sensitive, non-stigmatizing ways. Check if you're subscribed to this channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a comment saying I watched here so I can recognize you and know who truly appreciates the stories on this channel. Like this video and share it with someone you believe should know this shocking account. No child deserves to be born condemned, and only through education and awareness can we prevent such tragedies from recurring.